We're going to have probably a smaller group this morning, given the holiday tomorrow. But I would ask that when you do address, that you speak into the microphone so that it can be picked up by the Minuteman Media Network. As we usually do, we'll go around the table and you just identify yourself and your committee and whatever report you'd like to give. I'll start with you, Gary.
Thanks. Gary Kleiman, Chair of the Planning Board, and I apologize, I missed last month's meeting, and so a bunch to update you on, including I'll start with just bragging a little bit on behalf of the Planning Department. You may remember that we, over the past couple of years, have put together Envision Concord, a long-range plan, Bridge to 2030, and it was announced yesterday that we won an award, the Daniel Burnham Comprehensive Planning Award. Will be awarded December 15th. So, yeah, basically for the comprehensiveness of the recommendations and so forth. And if you haven't seen all of the annexes, I think they're twice this thick at the public library, so this is just the report. But in terms of planning board business, we're starting to dig into this, and Tom was just asking if we have a raft of warrant articles for this year, and the short answer is no. We have really, I think there's a bunch of housekeeping warrant articles, just cleaning up the bylaw, some language changes that didn't make it in over the past years that should have. But really the big one is a formula business bylaw. We're contemplating extending or creating a formula business bylaw for Concord Center as opposed to the one that exists in West Concord. Limited Business District number 2 is on the edge of the Concord Center Business District next to the Playhouse. And it's been sitting vacant for years, and we attempted some zoning changes 3 years ago. It's still been vacant, and so the planning board is wrestling right now. I think it's controversial, and that's probably the one that you'll hear about at the hearing and at town meeting, whether or how to change the zoning to make that zoning district fit in with the rest of the community. And then maybe a possible change to the wireless overlay district around the Middlesex school area. Otherwise, I think most of the action coming out of the Envision Concord plan is being contemplated in terms of warrant articles for town meeting of 2020. They just are things that are bigger challenges, take a little bit more planning and thought before we're ready to move forward with the zoning article changes. So I think we'll see them then. In terms of other business, we have a couple of PRDs before us, one Old Bedford Road and one on Main Street in West Concord. And they're proving to be of high interest items to the public. So we're getting lots of public comment and lots of iterations and changes from the applicants. We'll see if they ever proceed.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Keep moving along.
Hi.
Good morning.
I'm Gordon Brockway. I'm the chair of the Light Board. Some of the things that are current in our activities include we commissioned and have received a study of the funds that we've accumulated, the sort of the cash balance. The study was done by E&E, Energy New England, and provides a number of recommendations or options that we can choose from. One of them is to fund further retirement budget called OPEB. Our budget looks pretty good at this point, a little better this year than last year. We're going to have a little bit more of a surplus. We ran a small deficit last year. The light plan is in the process of upgrading its billing system, so you're going to see some changes in your bill. It's going to combine several, not all of the services that the town provides. It's not going to include property tax, but it will include broadband, water, and electricity. And I don't know if I'm forgetting anything.
Trash collection?
It might. I don't really remember. So anyway, and one of the big benefits of this is that it's going to enhance service. We're going to be able to tell where there are outages and keep a better tab on how quickly we respond to outages and a number of other benefits. One of the things that we've worked on most recently was out of the clear blue sky. Well, first some background. Concord has been very supportive of solar. We've got a fair number of utility scale solar installations across town, and of course rooftop. And what was it, about 5 years ago, we ran a rooftop campaign called Solarize Concord, with generous rebate support, net metering, which gives a very beneficial treatment to the electricity that the solar panel owners generate, and an SREC program, which is solar renewable energy credits that have been very valuable and that are ending. So the SREC program was followed by SREC 1, SREC 2, and then and SREC 2 is over, to be replaced by the SMART program, whatever that stands for, which Concord cannot participate in. So we're locked out of the SREC system now, and the state government has offered the municipal light plant communities the opportunity to participate in a matching grant or a matching funds that would match rebates that the light plants can offer. Basically one-on-one, about a total's $1.20 a watt. We'd kick in 60 cents, the state kicks in 60 cents. My guess is that when that small amount of money is exhausted, that will be the end of state support for anything equivalent to the SREC program. There may still be a tax credit, but as it is, the tax credit isn't terribly valuable. So anyway, we did apply. We only had 2 weeks to do it. It was due last Friday. I believe that we made that deadline. And finally, the last thing I just wanted to tell you about is that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about rate design. We have raised the per account fee by $3 from $9 to $12. The idea for that was to make sure that everybody was paying at least a minimal amount of money to pay towards the overhead of operating the plant. We've also been looking at whether or not we want to try to encourage what we call beneficial electrification by lowering the marginal cost of electricity, the per kilowatt hour cost, basically making it the same cost for everybody. That would bring down higher users and maybe increase lower users. The reason for that is that if we're encouraging people to, say, buy an electric vehicle or to heat their house with 100% green energy, we don't want to penalize people for taking on that new load. That study is underway. We're also talking about using smart meters in order to implement a billing regime that would charge more at high cost times of the day. And that's a billing system or a rate design called time of use rates. In order to do it, we need to install smart meters. We're seeing some resistance among some people in the community to the idea of having smart meters for a number of reasons. But anyway, that may be the way forward, because if we can implement that and basically give people a signal that their electricity costs more at certain times of day, they could reduce their usage during those times and actually reduce the cost for everybody. So that's my spiel. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody questions?
I have a comment though, and it has to do with microphones. These microphones only work if you're relatively close to the microphone, and although people in the room may hear you, the listening audience may not if you're not close to the microphone.
Yeah.
Good morning, Nia Glenn, Chair of the Historic Districts Commission. As I mentioned at our last meeting, we have been exploring expanding the Main Street district, and to that effect we had a public neighborhood workshop on the 14th and had a good turnout, I thought. Pretty much everyone in the room spoke, which was, I thought, an achievement. The purpose of the meeting was to get feedback from people. We had previously sent out letters, survey, etc. We got about 30% response on the survey. At this point, I would say we have a few definite no's, a few definite yeses, and a sea of maybes. So at this point, we are going to put in a placeholder for a warrant article and proceed along, still gathering information, do more hearings, and see where it ends up. At this point, we really don't have a feel for whether it has enough support to go to town meeting, but that's what we're working on. The workshop was videoed, and there is a link on the HTC webpage to that workshop. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Well, I also thought there was a lot of dissemination of information at the workshop, and some people have had experiences in other communities with their historic district commissions, and I think that caused them to be a little leery of the proposal, but I thought you all did an excellent job in terms of describing how it would work here and why you were doing what you were doing. So,
Thank you.
morning.
Hi, I'm Mav Pardee from the Library Committee. We actually postponed our monthly meeting because of the holiday. So big news right now at the library is November is NaNoWriMo month, which is National Novel Writing Month, and people write 50,000 words in 30 days. We actually have a group of people who are coming to the library and doing that. I'm blown away by that. And then the other ongoing activity at the library is, of course, planning for the expansion into 151 Main Street, the capital campaign, and the architectural plans. And then a lot of emphasis on tech planning and security. We have Wi-Fi for users, and we want to increase that and strengthen the security on that. And the other thing that we're very proud of is that the Girls Who Code group is always sold out. So that's a very popular program. But there are phenomenal programs at the library, particularly in the children's room. If none of you have kids or grandkids, I'm always just stunned by the number of things that they put together for families in the community.
I'm the liaison to the Commission on Disability, and I know you went and presented to them about your plan. That was very appreciative, and I think that's the type of collaboration that we want to see, so that was great. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Morning, John.
Hi, I'm John Kratzley, the Vice Chair of the Community Preservation Committee, and we've been meeting quite actively because we've been reviewing 13 applicants totaling 2.4 million, and we have about 1.7 million to distribute. So we've done our site visits, and we've had everybody in for individual interviews. Last night we began our very preliminary discussions of where we might head with our distributions. The most important meeting is next Tuesday, the 27th, at 7 right here in the Townhouse. It'll be a public hearing on all 13 applicants and individual. All citizens are welcome to give us their views on the worthiness of these applicants, and perhaps even if they want to say what numbers would be appropriate for them. This will result in traditionally, one warrant article for the entire package as we put it all together. There is an additional town warrant article. There's one proposed expenditure for the Emerson land acquisition. There's a CPC contribution, but there's also a town portion. So there's one more town warrant article that's interrelated to the CPC warrant article.
And the good news, I gather, is that the state match is an increase from last year, and that is always a question as to how much these CPC funding, the state matches some. It began at, I think, 100% way back in early 2000s, and is now down to this year was about 19%. Last year, I think it was 17.2%. So that does help out. It means that the funds that we all contribute through taxes go a little bit further.
Yeah, it helped us get from what we thought was around 1.6 to 1.7. It was good news.
Can you just repeat the date of the
Yeah,
hearing?
the public hearing is the 27th, next Tuesday. I have down here 12, which is a big mistake. It's 11. November 27th, the next Tuesday at 7 here in the townhouse. And all 13 applicants and individuals wishing to make comments on any one or all of the 13 applicants are welcome to be there.
And it's very informative, so I hope people do show up.
So I'm Jim Smith, Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Sort of a short agenda. I just want to comment, because the Planning Board already mentioned the two PRDs that are running through their system. I'm going to make an observation as somebody who was on the Planning Board in the 80s. Concord is sort of a quarter wet and a quarter in conservation land. And every time there is sort of a step change in housing prices, there are developments in marginal lands, and they are always an issue. And I think that right now the housing need in town there's a significant housing need for sort of planned residential developments, empty nester sort of housing, and I think that's what we're seeing. And we're always happy that the Planning Board gets to do all the heavy lifting on these things, but I do think that we're seeing them, and we're seeing them in places that are it's just marginal issues, and I think that's just the nature of Concord. Second thing I would say is that we've sort of been now 2 or 3 years into the anti-mansionization bylaw that was passed by the town, and I'm not sure that what we see at the Zoning Board of Appeals, that we see too many efforts to try to build houses that are sort of close to the line there. But I do think that I would say the mood has moderated, that what we are seeing in special permits and so forth, I mean, they're big houses and there are people in the areas who think they're really too big, but they also, the proposals are moderating from what we had seen in the past, and I think that builders are sort of trying to be more sensitive to that, a little bit more sensitive to that, and maybe that's an economic issue, so I won't necessarily assign any motives to it, but I think that when we see these proposals, they are, by and large, pretty reasonable coming in. So I think that's sort of a good thing, and maybe that's an effect of just having the bylaw, even though it doesn't really affect the issue. And the third is that, and I said this last time, we continue to have a staffing problem. We have 3 regular members and only 1 associate member. We really need to, have capacity for 2 more associate members. There has to be 3 people to actually be at the meeting and vote on a particular proposal. The Zoning Board of Appeals acts by unanimous consent, and it's a service issue. We had a situation just this past month where somebody who's been giving piano lessons in their home for the last 20 years and is getting a business permit, wasn't able to get their permit renewal because one of the members of the board who could be there, has their daughters or sons or whatever take piano lessons from the person. So there was a conflict, and I was out on business. And so, these are the simplest kinds of renewals in the history of the world. But because we're down, we're just not serving citizens. So again, if we can keep continuing to try to work on that, it'd be great.
I would just say, I think also this is going to be an issue for all committees when we have a lot of vacancies, unfortunately. It's hard to get volunteers because everybody's busy, and I think people appreciate that the volunteers do an enormous amount of work. But if you can let us know what vacancies you anticipate, how many we need to fill, we'll keep doing whatever we can to get the green cards in and get people onto the different committees, because it's a problem all over, frankly.
Actually, I had a question.
Yes.
The two PIDs you refer to, one of them is on Bedford Road,
Yes,
and the other one is in what, West Concord?
West Concord on
Off
Main Street.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, those are the current two.
Right.
Jonathan Keyes, this is the Tax Fairness Committee. I really don't have much to say since last time. We've got our meeting is next week, and the appraisers are coming, and I think they're a bit concerned that this it was more work for them than they anticipated, and that possibly it's going to require a full-time person, not a part-time person. So we're going to know more in a week than we know right now. That's it.
Great. Thank you. Do you want to go now, or do you want to wait until we go around?
I'll wait.
Okay. Why don't we start here? And great.
Good morning, Carlin Reed. I'm the chair of the PEG Access Advisory Committee, also known as the PAC. We have our meetings right after this meeting, so I can tell you what's going to be happening today, which is kind of fun. We're going to be looking at two major items, one of which is the report that our committee is supposed to be doing for the town. And yes, Tom, I have a question for you about this. I just want to make sure that we're doing it the right way. This is the report that goes part of the annual town report, and it's due January 1, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and it's supposed to be a summary of what we've been doing so far, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, we're pretty much on top of that. We're going to be looking at some edits and going through it today. The other thing that we're working on is we always get an update on how the status of Minuteman Media, the network that's recording us, and also the other PEG access programs. But we're also going to be looking at something new. It's something that I don't think the Select Board has ever done before, and that's filing comments before the Federal Communication Commission on an issue that could very seriously affect funding for all PEG programs, not just Concord. So we have a draft set of these comments, reply comments set up, and I've just about finalized them. I'm going to let my committee go through them one more time and see if there's any small little edits, because it's already been substantially approved by the Select Board for filing.
Right.
And I suspect that next week we're going to be submitting it for your review, Tom, for finalization and signatures. And this set of comments concerned us about it because it proposes to change the way that the funding formula is done. Right now, we get what's known as capacity on the PEG channels for free. And in this proposal, which is led by some members of the industry, the cable industry, they want to put a value on that. Doing so would reduce the amount of money we get by whatever that value is set. So the question is this appropriate? And our reply comments will say, no, we don't think so, because we need the money to fund these services. Better language than that is actually contained in the document, but that's the essence of the program. So it's something new that we're doing, and that's going to be filed probably next week, I anticipate. Otherwise, we're fully staffed, and you're welcome to stay for the meeting afterwards to come watch.
We get, I think it's 4.8% of the funds that, the fees that people pay for Comcast in the town. And those funds are what are utilized in order to provide the staff and the equipment and all of that for the Minuteman Media Network. What the providers are hoping is that they pay us less and they get to keep the rest of the money. So that's what the FCC is, that's before them. I think one of the reasons we didn't have to get too involved in the past is this is kind of a new proposal that would have a really direct impact and a fairly serious impact. So.
Absolutely. We get about $400,000
Yeah.
a year out of the $8 million that Comcast gets from us.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting proposal. And if anybody reads the Wall Street Journal, there was a great article about the diminution of cable services for cord cutters and what's that happening. And the first paragraph says something about, so the companies are looking for ways to increase their bottom line, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're taking a stand, we're
Yeah.
joining it.
And the Mass Municipal Association, they've written, a number of other communities have written in, so we're going to be joining them. Thank you for your efforts on that.
I have a question.
Yes.
And so I'm one of those people who's cut their cable. As people do more like what I'm doing and use town broadband and, you know, use CTV antenna, does that mean that your income goes down because you're no longer a Comcast customer?
Does it mean the income down goes down? That's a very difficult question to answer. I could say yes easily, but it would be wrong because the revenues come from not just the cable subscribers, but also advertising and other forms. So what we've seen is that while in Concord at least, the subscriber numbers have started to drop, not dramatically, but some drop, the revenues have not dropped as quickly because the prices have gone up.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. So because remember, this is a line of business. And like any business arm, you want to make sure you maintain your revenue streams. So the average per subscriber price has gone up.
It just occurs to me that, you know, I really value that, you know, how can those people like me who aren't contributing indirectly to you, you know.
Well, maybe they
can
are.
support it.
If they watch, that's the important thing because it means that you're paying attention.
Janet Miller, Chair of the Comprehensive Sustainability and Energy Committee. I wanted to share with you a new project. Mark Hansen approached us with a design, in fact built, window insert, which he uses in his own home and has data to show how much how efficient this is at reducing drafts and increasing insulation in windows, especially single pane windows. So he asked us to see if we can promote this in some way. So we approached the schools, and David Davidson, Peabody School, has agreed to make this a project which actually fit very well with his science class on heat transfer. So they're going to be building some of these. They're basically a simple wood frame with that shrink plastic on top, but built with a sort of gasket around the edge so that it doesn't leak. So the kids are going to be finding appropriate windows, building them, measuring the temperature between the frame and the window and in the room to show how efficient they are, et cetera, et cetera. And Peter Nickel, who works in the Rivers and Revolutions program, thought that maybe next year in the community stewardship program, they might be able to promote these, build these for people who needed them. So that's something new.
I love the idea of being able to use the schools as both a measuring technique, but also a learning experience for the science.
Right, and it means a lot of parents become aware of this, and that helps get the word out that this is not very difficult and inexpensive, but will save you money.
What school will it be?
In the Peabody. And the Rivers and Revolutions, of course, is the high school. Just one other thing, you talked about staffing. We have 7 members out of possible 9, and we have 2 people who filled out green cards who are very well qualified that have not, to the best of my knowledge, and nobody's told me, they've actually been officially appointed. And it would be nice to have.
Look into that, get that moving.
Yes, thank you very
Great,
much.
Thanks for letting us know.
Okay, thank you.
Good segue to the school committee here.
Most certainly. Robert Crom, School Committee. The most important thing the school committee has engaged in here in the last several weeks and 2 or 3, 4, 5 months or so is the whole idea of zero-based budgeting. And this is a major change from the way budgets were presented in the past. It's a more clear, more transparent approach, and it has eliminated several lines in the budget, and it is just more easily understandable that way. So we've had the budgets presented and discussed by the school committee for the first time on November 13th. On November 19th, we visited with the Carlisle Finance Committee. Yesterday, the Campus Oversight Committee had a meeting with Gale Associates, and we expect a draft report by December 11. On November 26, which is next Monday, the FinCom Guidelines Committee is going to meet again with our superintendent and director of finance and a couple of school committee members for a second session of questions and answers. And then the next day, next Tuesday, we are going to conduct a public hearing on the budgets starting at 6:30. At 7:30, we have a regular school committee joint meeting scheduled, at which point we will discuss, among other things, of course, capital plans for both districts for the first time. So that'll be very interesting. Also, we will start to talk about warrant articles and at the next meeting finalize capital plans. We have 2 meetings scheduled for December 11 and 18th, and that's when we hope to achieve that. Any questions?
No, the finance committee has been pleased with the efforts that you've made in terms of the zero-based budgeting. The one question I would have is, has there been any discussion regarding siting of the wireless, the cell towers on school property?
Yes, I'm about to respond to this individual we've been speaking to at Verizon, but given our focus right now on town meeting articles, capital plans, budgets, it'll probably be
pretty full plate.
Early next year that we will. And we're hoping also that we see some more information coming from the town efforts in this direction. But it's clearly something that needs to be addressed.
Sure.
The Finance Committee is very pleased at the changes that have been made by the superintendent and her finance director, especially as regards transparency. And in relation to transparency, where does the effort to get the school committee signed up with clear.gov stand?
We basically have been signed up. There was, I think it's probably happened within the last week or so, but again, Laurie Hunter would be able to give you an exact date. But we're committed to the program, and
so if
we'll
not
be part
now,
of it.
very soon citizens will be able to go on clear.gov and see.
It's a matter of logistics rather than final signatures or anything.
Great, that's great.
And also want to emphasize your point that you raised. We're also very pleased with the response and the cooperation we've seen from the Finance Committee. So I think, judging back, and I went to a lot of these meetings, 3, 4, 5 years ago, it's just been a big change for the positive.
So, absolutely. We're grateful for that. So, thank you.
Just a comment. I have had recently several friends coming from other towns, other places, visiting in Concord, and they're just appalled that they cannot have service in Concord Center. So I'm just making a plea, a town like Concord, why to really work much harder, more diligently on getting adequate service for not only the visitors, but for the people, the merchants, and all the people who live in the town center. So just.
It's not an easy.
Oh, I recognize that, but I want to encourage people to keep pushing hard.
The wireless overlay district is actually part of the zoning bylaw, and
okay.
actually the planning board had considered that. We did put it on our list of goals, but we actually, I think, require a little bit of financial allocation to get some consulting help in order prior to being able to do a full town-wide assessment of our existing wireless overlay district. There were some small efforts going on to look at, the school, to look at, so we thought better to wait and see how that plays out. But we also are hoping that we might, within the town budget somewhere, find a small allocation of resources to, I'm just saying. This year, a small effort was made to look at one particular section of the wireless overlay district near the Middlesex School, because there was an issue that came to town meeting last year, and we thought we would do our due diligence on that one area. But we have not undertaken a town-wide assessment. It probably would be the planning board that needs to respond to what you're talking about. And unfortunately, I think it wasn't in the budget for this year, but we're hoping.
Please put downtown Concord number 1 on your.
I will be speaking with Chris about seeing what we can do in that. There are a lot of areas that are being pulled and dug for financing.
Edward Larner, I'm the vice chair for the Concord Housing Authority, and the chair is occupied today with an electrical inspection. Basically, we're doing quite well with our budget, our capital improvement plan. We've completed several items, the paving project at Everett Gardens and the roofing project there, a new boiler at the Peter Buckley building. So financially, we're doing quite well. I was here last week when we had the Affordable Housing Funding Committee. Todd Benjamin, who's also on our board, will headlight that. Sitting here, I realized that in Boston on that day was when they announced that Amazon was not going to come to Boston. It was well understood beforehand, but I think one of the major reasons was housing, and so housing has become a greater issue, and it will affect Concord in the long run too. Right now, our waiting lists are not too bad. We have turnover that seems to provide for people to get through the waiting list if they have the local resident preference. The state has changed a little bit on the preference lists. They're centralizing it statewide. It will still have a local preference, but we feel that's probably going to impact us in the sense that some of the larger communities, when they have a homeless family, can go to the top of the list because of an emergency situation. So, we're looking to make sure that the local preference is important, because it means town support for additional housing and so forth. So, the other thing that I mentioned to Tom was that we have been meeting with the other two housing associations and try to become more of a single voice about housing in town. So we felt after there was a controversy about the Junction Village thing that people kind of divided, and we were sort of in the middle on an opinion on whether to be for or against it. The foundation was against it, whereas the Development Corporation was leading it. So since then we've been meeting 2 or 3 times a year to get things. So I think we're making good progress.
I think it's very healthy, and I'm glad to hear that. The other, housing is such a regional issue. There are 2 now proposals, one over in Sudbury, the other on the Maynard-Acton line, which would each have combined a total of about 550 units. The town going to be sending a letter to the select boards of each of those, because there are implications both in terms of traffic issues, as well as we have a regional emergency response of fire and police, and it would obviously have implications in that regard as well. So I think that there will be sort of housing all over. The feeling is that at the time of the census in 2021, everybody is concerned about the 40B implications, and that's one of the reasons Junction Village is important for our town. So, but thank you for that work, and I'm glad you're all coordinating, because it is important.
That was the thing, is being able to speak with one voice. I think is important, for the town to deal with these issues.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Only you.
Ann Humphrey, Concord Dog Park Feasibility Study Committee. This will probably be the last time that you'll hear from me. And actually, I'm going to miss coming to these. Maybe I can just sneak in and observe. Our report is complete. To look at the feasibility of and possibility of putting dog park in Concord. We had our final public hearing for public comment. Let me tell you that the copies, there are copies of our report at the libraries and here at the townhouse if anybody is interested in looking at them. We will be presenting our report to the select board on December 3rd, and I assume at that point you'll discharge us from our duties. We found it a fascinating study. We certainly enjoyed working on it. What we did was we looked at town properties around town. We surveyed dog owners for what they would like to see. We came up, and there were other things, but those were two of them. We determined that probably a 5-acre minimum would be the best in order to give adequate range for dogs to be, and also for things like parking and other things. At this point in time, we determined that there's no town property that meets all the criteria, but maybe there will be in the future. We looked at the cost to build and the cost to maintain. In some, although we determined that cost was a factor, and finding a good location. There are marginal, but not really good locations. But we also found there was little support for a dog park at this time. Maybe there will be in the future, so we've not, the report may help the select board in the future look at things. So basically that was all that I have to say. We enjoyed making the study, and grateful to have the opportunity. Those of us dog owners or former dog owners, or just people that like to walk in the woods and the fields. So, thank you.
Great, thank you.
This is a popular seat.
The hot seat.
It's warm over there.
Something I said. The warm seat.
It's better over here.
It's warmer.
I'm Ray Andrews, and I'm here in place of Todd Benjamin. He's better looking, but he was unavailable for breakfast. I'm here on behalf of the Affordable Housing Funding Committee, and we think that we're coming close to wrapping up our responsibilities. Committee members are Todd, Sue Myers, Holly Darzan, Vince Carlson, and myself, and we've been meeting since September of 2017. We've met with a lot of organizations, the Assessor's Office, Concord Housing Authority, the Housing Development Corporation, the Housing Foundation, Finance Committee, the Finance Department, League of Women Voters. I could go on. We felt that, agreed with the charge from the town meeting, that there really is a need for affordable housing in Concord. It's not unique to Concord. What we found is that a third of the Concord's 6,735 households spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing. And that's pretty phenomenal in a town that has the image or reputation that Concord has. In January 2018, there were 143 applicants, 20 with local preference on the waiting list for senior or disabled rental housing in Concord, and the estimated wait time for the 20 people who are with local preference was 2 to 3 years, and the wait time for family rental units at the Concord Housing Authority is 6 to 7 years. So that says that there's clearly a need. Another interesting statistic was that a median sale price of a home in Concord is $1,025,000, and that requires a household income of $234,000 to maintain, to be less than 30% of gross income for housing. But the price of a median home the price of a home that a median income household could afford in Concord is $509,000. So in 2017, there was one single family home and 23 condos sold in Concord below that price. The reports, I'm basically giving you a summary of the report. The report says the risk of failing to meet these, this challenge will be reduce economic vitality in town, loss of town character and cohesiveness, less diversity and less sustainable town economically, environmentally, and financially. So we were charged with finding ways to fund affordable housing in Concord, and we studied 10 different funding strategies and narrowed it down to basically 4. This does not include zoning. We think zoning needs to be looked at, needs to be improved, because right now it's a significant impediment to housing that is affordable in Concord. So of the 10 we looked at, the 4 that we recommended to the board were a budget line item, which we paid from property taxes, a real estate transfer fee, which would be paid by the buyer, building permit surcharge, building permit fee surcharge, excuse me, and a payment in lieu of taxes from large nonprofit property owners. That actually is the response we got to the last. It was, I won't say it went down in flames, but it certainly was a lot of resistance to the payment in lieu of taxes based on, I think, past experience with that and maybe other reasons as well. If you want to read the report, it's on the town website under Affordable Housing Funding Committee. It's the link labeled Preliminary Report 1029. So good news is there's only 9 pages of summary, and then there's 10 pages of background.
Can I ask a question about
Yeah, sure. I think that's pretty much it. Yes. Any questions?
You mentioned 4 strategies plus zoning changes would be recommended. Do you have in the report the zoning changes that you think are
No.
You-
Just well, only to the extent that what do you call it? Accessory living unit. What do you call it? Accessory.
Accessory
mother-in-law apartments. Yeah.
accessory dwelling.
Housing units. One, obviously, the density and size of homes, sort of related to the mansion concern.
I think the state is actually promoting a number of zoning changes as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is one of the
Yeah.
issues that we are looking at for the next year's warrant, and I just wonder if there were going to be recommendations in the report.
Yeah.
We are looking at it.
Yeah, good. And we felt that was outside of our mandate, and I think the committee felt there's enough work on our plate without trying to have mission creep.
The figure that you use saying that that certain percent of the town is spending more than 30% of their income on housing, is that based upon, how is that based on?
I think that came from Liz Rust at the Regional Housing Office, Regional Housing Services Office.
I'm wondering how much taxes are, a part of that figure, because the line item increase for to help the affordable housing is increasing the tax rate, and therefore whether you're sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul and not accomplishing, how much will that accomplish?
Right. I think it's a matter of who's Peter and who's Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah. I think I would say that makes sense. That the tax increase, although the tax increase that we were suggesting, the line item is somewhere between 1% and 0.5%. And obviously, if that money, the resulting funds could result in more affordable housing, the feeling is that the benefit to the town
Sure.
would be greater than the
I
cost
appreciate you
to,
guys have done an
I think it was
enormous amount
Peter
of
we're
work.
robbing, right? So, yeah, raise the cost to Peter, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Good. In the back? Make our way around.
Carolyn Gothard, Concord Ag Committee. We're wrapping up last year and thinking about our community outreach in March, which will probably be on food that is available in Concord through the winter. Imagine being a pilgrim and what you would be eating at this time of year is pretty bleak, but we think we can give you a better picture of what's available now. We also still have an input on anyone working on affordable housing because we need seasonal housing for workers on the farms. Even Verrill Farm has a problem with getting their dwellings licensed. So we're still looking for at least seasonal low-income housing. I believe that's it. Our
Great.
next meeting is December 8th.
Terrific, thank you.
Good morning. Diane Strasberg, Chair of the Historical Commission. Our major focus right now continues to be assessing the relatively, I think about 2-year-old now, demolition review bylaw. So we're looking at how that's working for the community. Our own internal processes and procedures, especially where we do the public hearings and look at actual applications. And then also looking at what other communities are doing for kind of new ideas and also best practices. We're a long way from any bylaw change recommendations, if any, so at least a year away from those. But we're doing a good assessment. 2 items I'd mention in regard to the demo review. We think, but I'm not going to give any numbers until we get through this winter, but it looks like applications for 100% demolition are down.
Yay.
We, that's what we say. We think that's a good thing. And we hope that it's due in part to the new bylaw, which one of the goals was to at least encourage owners and developers to think about other options before they do 100% demolition. So we have a little bit of anecdotal evidence that maybe some people have thought about different things before they even come to apply. So we hope it's having that effect.
Right.
We did, in the past week or 2, have an application that went to public hearing for 46 Hubbard Street. And it was determined to be what we call preferably preserved. So there's a hold on any demolition for at least a year. But the we think good thing about that hearing, one of the good things was the public participation. So we had a packed hearing room and many people spoke about it. So we like that the public is getting engaged in that process. So that's our main focus right now. We will have some vacancies coming up. 2 regular commission members, I think this is in May, June. We'll most likely fill one of those with one of our associate members, but that will leave 1 commission and up to 2 associate member vacancies. In our ideal world, our wish list is that we would have some specific expertise based on what we want to do and need to do. So architects, historic preservationists. We're losing our archaeologist who's been working on a major project for the town over at Barrett Farm area and has identified some other key projects that we might undertake. So that would be our hope, is that we could find some specific expertise.
Well, hopefully some of the people you have might know other people who can, and encourage them to join in, so.
Yes, we hope
Thank
so.
you, that's great.
All right, thanks.
Hey,
Yeah.
question, I have a question. I've often wondered whether your organization has had any contact with the town's Janet, what is your call? The Comprehensive Energy and Sustainability Committee?
George,
Janet?
what's your question? I'm sorry.
Well,
Whether the
here's the basis of my question. Both the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the town have goals for reducing carbon emissions. Up until fairly recently, the electrical generation sector was the largest source of carbon emissions. That has successfully reduced its emissions and continues to do so, to the point where transportation is now the largest source of carbon emissions in probably the town and the Commonwealth. When that gets addressed, then the next highest source of emissions will be conditioning the built environment, so HVAC systems, heating and cooling buildings, both residential and commercial. We've got a large inventory of historic buildings in this town, which I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing that they're pretty energy inefficient. What will happen when those things intersect? And I'm wondering if anybody in your organization is talking to other organizations in town that are looking forward to reducing carbon emissions, to generate ideas about how you can mesh with those goals.
Great question. We have not yet done that. We've begun talking about what opportunities might exist even more broadly in collaborating, working with, at least talking with other commissions and organizations in town. So one of the things we have to work out are that we've realized is when people come before us, what are the criteria? If they say, for instance, this is a completely heating inefficient house and there's not much we can do, or it's going to be so costly to fix it, we can't. We need to work more as a commission and maybe more broadly as to what are the criteria that would allow someone to demo a house for reasons like that. But also, I think there's also, we've been thinking about some big ideas that we don't have much yet to support or assess them with, but things like how might we have torn down a lot of small houses. Why can't those be affordable housing? I mean, that might be completely an impractical idea, but town can't buy all those houses and run them. But let's think about things like that. We came across an idea, I think it's in Portland, Oregon, where if they approve a demolition, the people who are demoing must do something sustainable with a certain amount of the material from that demolition. It can't just be thrown out. So who do we go to explore ideas like that? So we haven't yet done those things, and they're on our list to do. So I'm going to add your specific thought to that, because that isn't one we've come across, we've thought about yet on our own, so thank you. And if anyone else has ideas, for coordinating, just thinking, brainstorming, let us know.
That's one of, I think, the purposes of the chair's breakfast is to allow sort of the people who have different perspectives on things to kind of get together and to communicate and change and get ideas. So.
I'd just like to recommend that Concord's electric supply is becoming 100% green. So even in a historical building, moving towards electric heat can actually help your carbon footprint.
Great, and so that highlights something we want to work on, which is we ask people to delay their demolition to look at options. But frankly, we don't have a good list of options developed or people they can go speak to. So that's, we should know more about that so that we can educate people that there are other things that they can look at. So we have a lot of work to do.
I have a comment. First of all, Kate Hanley has been getting an analysis.
Maybe it'd be
with,
best if you came into the
okay.
microphone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the public who's not here will be able to.
Kate Hanley, the Sustainability Director, has been working with KLA to do an analysis of where the carbon emissions are coming from, and which is actually showing that emissions from buildings is actually greater than vehicles. So we do have to address that as well as vehicles, and as you know, we're promoting electric vehicles. I don't know how aware you are of CSEC programs together with the town, together with the CMLP to promote weatherization, to promote the heat pump heat, which, the Heat Smart program was a big push to get those in place, but there are subsidies continuing for heat pumps. So between that, LEDs, lights, anyway, we're trying to get more incentives to get people to reduce their emissions from buildings.
Yeah.
So again, I think we need to learn more about these options and put it together in some way that we can educate. Now, all that the Historical Commission can do is reply to applicants who say we need to demolish our house because we cannot fix or we can't afford to fix these issues. But still, some of these things that you're talking about would definitely come under what people are citing as reasons they need to demolish instead of remodel. So
Thank you so much.
we'll just reach out to all of you if we don't hear from you, but also get in touch with us if you have further ideas. We'll do this more formally as we move ahead. Thank you.
Ellen Quackenbush, Personnel Board, and so we haven't met, but I have a good staffing news, and thank you very much for approving 2 people. We not only have a full slate now, but we've managed to find folks who have a strong HR background. So we've got one guy who was a former VP of HR in a pharmaceutical company, and even more exciting, a guy who is the current HRIS manager at State Street, who is familiar with the compensation software that Amy Foley uses. So we've now got a full slate of folks, and also people who know HR, which has been not true of former board members. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
Morning, David Bell, Conservation Restriction Committee. We're continuing to do our normal monitoring, and our biggest accomplishment is we've done our small piece to help with the White Pond acquisition. We did we have a draft of a baseline documentation report.
Terrific. Well, thank you. Thank everybody. And, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
That was a big part of my question. I wanted to run the clock. I'm Tom Tarpey, Chair of the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee, as most of you know, is in the middle of the guidelines process, which happens every year at this time, during which we meet with representatives of all of the budgeting entities of the town, the 2 school committees and the town manager. We listen to them, we reflect on their proposals for budget changes, budget increases, and give our thoughts about those. We are also engaged in a new process, which is aimed at setting what we have come to call the sustainable growth rate. And it is our intention and hope that at the end of this guideline session, we will be able to publish a series of numbers projecting out as far as 5 years, telling the budgeting entities what the Finance Committee feels are sustainable growth rates in future years. So instead of being reactive as the guideline setting process is, this will be prospective and give the budgeting entities some information about what the Finance Committee feels will be a sustainable rate of growth so that they can use that information in setting their own budget priorities and especially in engaging in their collective bargaining negotiations with the various unions that serve the town, both the schools and the town government. So that's a fairly complex process. We've been engaged in that for almost 2 years now, and we have settled on a small subset of financial indicators that are publicly available that will be blended in some way to give a formula to set that sustainable growth rate. So that keep watching us on television and you'll see that unfold.
We had a lively discussion at the select board that made a presentation just on Monday. So it's a very important topic and one that I think we're all trying to wrestle with. We hear here, you know, at this location, all of the needs and what we'd love to be able to do, but whether we're going to be able to accomplish each and every one and still have a budget that makes some sense is tough. And I think the Finance Committee has been doing a great job in that. But as I was saying earlier, thank you all for coming. And
Tom, can I ask you,
yes.
is there anything you might like to tell us about your efforts to replace the town manager?
That, we do have the committee is in place, and we have put out a proposal for the consultant that we're going to be retaining. My understanding is that they've limited down now to 3, and the subcommittee is going to be making their recommendation to the full select board. I believe it's going to be on December 3rd, and so then the consultant will be retained, and then I think there will be discussions and put out proposals to get the resumes of individuals who are interested, get the information, and then they'll be going through those. So it's starting to pick up pretty good speed. I anticipate that sort of January, February is when most of that work is going to be done. But things are moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? I didn't want to cut people off too quickly, but once again, I hope everybody has a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next month.